Welcome to Beast Bodies. My name is Kiersey, and I am joined here today by Ryan. Hey, Ryan, how are you?
I am magical.
Awesome. So great to hear that. Ryan and I met, what, 3 or 4 years ago? I can't even remember. It's been so long.
Probably about 3 years ago. I think we met on Tommy C's channel, I believe, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Back in my previous YouTube days before I came back to YouTube as a new person.
Yeah, you're completely reinvented, which is good.
Pretty much. Well, this was always kind of my goal that I wanted to go into. I always wanted to go into the fitness industry online, and I'm
Hmm.
finally here. And you, back in the day, you were doing like gossipy news. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's basically how we met because I got to be decent friends with Tommy, who was doing some stuff, and then Dead on Dave, who was doing stuff with Tommy. And I think I actually probably met you more through Dead on Dave because me and him became pretty close friends.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I was doing primarily I was never into YouTube drama really as far as interest, but it was just kind of like what you did to try and get somewhere. I
Yeah.
wasn't very good at it, but um,
Yeah,
but
well,
yeah, no,
that's a
I was
good
doing
stepping
that.
stone.
It is funny because in a way, me and you both kind of stepped away from YouTube, and then we came back, and we both have health centric um, channels because me and my friend do a health podcast. So it is kind of funny how we both kind of reinvented ourselves coming back to YouTube.
Yeah, but I love it. And the community that we were in, I mean, it kind of fell apart over the years anyways because
Yeah,
it was such a gossipy
yeah,
community.
yeah,
But it was a good entrance into the YouTube world and to really
for
like
sure.
see how it rolls. So I'm,
Yeah,
I'm
for
glad we
sure.
met and I'm glad we stayed in touch and I have been following your social media and your development over time. And something that you talk quite openly about and a lot about is your history with eating disorders and also with exercise addiction. And that is
Hmm.
something that I would like to talk about today because I think there are a lot of people out there who struggle with some type of eating disorder or just disordered eating in general and don't really know a lot about it or don't even know that they have it.
Hmm. I think it's really interesting, and you can kind of give me your perspective on this too, because so for me, it all started kind of snowballing into this anorexia, orthorexia, exercise addiction stuff when I was about 18 years old. And I had just gone through a really hard breakup at the time. I mean, looking back, like when you break up with someone in high school, it's actually not that big a deal when
Mm-hmm.
you look at it years later. But at the time, it was like a really big deal for me. And I didn't really have any control in my life. In my entire existence, I've always battled obsessive compulsive disorder,
Mm-hmm.
which for me manifested in a lot of different ways. For a while, I would be obsessed with golf. So I played golf like every day for like 6 hours. I got really good.
Mm-hmm.
I played varsity in high school. I played in college for a little bit. Um, but when I went through this breakup, I was like, I need to regain control of my life. And so I thought I could do that by just getting fitter. And
Mm-hmm.
I'd always been into exercise and and stuff like that, but I never really put a lot of focus on it. So I just started reading a bunch of stuff in bodybuilding forums, just things online. I was taking nutrition classes in college,
Mm-hmm.
and for some reason, another background is I've always been kind of a slender person. I've never had issues with being overweight as a kid or anything like that. I was always the opposite problem. But for some reason, I decided the smartest thing to do at the beginning of my fitness journey was cut down and then bulk up,
Uh-huh.
which is hard to do when you're already 120 pounds.
Right.
And it's hard to cut when you're 5'9" at 120 to cut more because
Right.
there's not much you're cutting besides muscle and skin, I guess.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
5'9" myself and I've been at 120 and yeah, people were concerned.
yeah, and so I started doing that, and the thing for me was eating disorders manifest for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's like trauma, or someone has someone in their life that passes away, and it triggers an eating disorder out of grief.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it literally was just trying to get. Well, it always stems from a control problem. They're always
Right.
trying to find something to control, but I never intended on losing weight, which sounds weird when I said like my idea was to cut. I didn't think of it in terms of cutting weight. I thought I was like going to cut fat and add muscle was my mindset. But I did that by exercising like 6, 7, 8 hours a day and also eating like 600 to 800 calories a day. Which
fun fact, you need food to build muscle.
Yeah, apparently that's true. And I've rediscovered that over the last like 5 years as I've been like battling this, is that food is integral apparently, which
crazy.
I always feel like you can somehow like find some way around that, because you read all these crazy things about now it's like keto or carnivore or low carb. And it's like, because we have such a overweight society and metabolically unhealthy society, that's all you see nowadays is like, oh, or it's the healthy at any size thing now, which is a little better, but still it's we have this messed up paradigm. And in the fitness industry, I feel like there's a lot more people that maybe they don't have a classical eating disorder, but I feel like when I go to the gym, there's a lot of people that have some level of body dysmorphia going on, where they're just not happy with anything less than perfection.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know a lot of people who have that, and that's something that I struggle with myself, body dysmorphia. To me, in the mirror, I look the same, and it doesn't matter how much I weigh. Like, I've been overweight in my life, I've been underweight in my life. I visually to myself look the exact same in the mirror. It's really
funny too, because I've gone through periods recently where I'm still needing to like gain weight, and it's like I can't be as active as I used to be because of certain events that we'll talk about later on in the podcast. So I just felt like, God, I'm just getting fat. And I'll say that, and my brother like looks at me and like, dude, shut up. Like and I went to the gym with him the other day. And I was just doing some like PT exercises and mainly just observing other people. But I was like, dude, I have no ass. I have like no, I'm like, you could snap me like a chicken. It's crazy. But so basically it stemmed like that. And then eventually by about probably within a year, so 2015, I got down to sub 100. I think my lowest was like 88 pounds. Wow. And I was never like put in a facility or hospital, which maybe I should have been.
Did you get
But I got help. But the thing was, I wasn't at a place where I was willing to accept I needed help. So I saw a nutritionist that specialized in eating disorders. I saw a therapist that specialized in eating disorders and orthorexia. And I wasn't at a place where I was willing to listen to either of them. So I think a big key is, if anyone's struggling with those types of mental issues, even if they're at a better weight like me now, you can have anorexia and actually be overweight, because it's the medical definition of it is it's a mental disorder. So you can actually be anorexic in here and be at a normal weight, but it won't be clinically diagnosed because doctors are only looking for the weight signs. But you can actually do damage to your body doing restriction and being a normal weight. Because, for instance, when I regained weight to the 120s, which still isn't great, I could hold my weight eating 1,200 calories a day because my body was still in starvation mode. It was just holding on to everything.
Let's backtrack for just a second here. You were looking for help, or you got help, but you didn't really want help. How did that happen? Like, how did you even get into that position where you were consulting with a therapist but not really wanting to listen?
Yeah, so for me, my parents kind of forced me into it. And well, I recognized that I had a problem, but one second. I recognized that I had a problem, but there's like a voice when you have an eating disorder. It's like your alter ego is in the back of your head. And you know you have a problem, but at the same time, you think you can handle it better than anyone around you. So I was seeing the nutritionist, but because I was also learning about nutrition, I thought I knew better than her. So I was like, I don't need you to give me advice because I know what I'm doing. And the thing I've learned over and over and over again, even up till now, is I don't know shit about, excuse my language, I don't know anything about what I'm doing. I can give other people advice, which is weird. And I feel like it's better advice but I can't like take my own medicine. It doesn't work when I do it.
Right.
So the first step was really finding a willingness to actually want to get better. And so at my lowest, I was like 88, and then I got up to like 100 for a little bit in 2016. And then we went on a trip to England where I was totally out of my safe zone of food. And I lost I think I got down to like 90 again. So I lost like 10 more pounds. So I kind of regressed. And then eventually I did get up to like 120s, and that's kind of where I stuck around for the next 3-4 years up until present day. So that's kind of been my journey with that. And up until now, I had never took care of any of the mental parts of the problem. I still had the mental compulsions the entire time, and just assumed because I gained weight that I was better, which isn't true in any case.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's all in the brain, really, when it comes to disorders like that. I've struggled myself with disordered eating pretty much all my life. I think I started emotionally eating in elementary school. I was bullied, and I just started eating, and I got really overweight. And then when I was 13, I just had it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take control of this. And I started starving myself, and I lost a lot of weight, and I looked great, and everybody was complimenting me on it. And in my brain, I'm like, okay, I'm like sitting in my room and eating an orange today, and nobody's noticing anything. Like, I don't really understand. Like, this is not doing, for me, it was a cry for help that nobody heard. But I was also hiding it really well, so I'm not like totally not blaming anyone there, and then it just kind of, I've cycled through my life so many times that whenever something was like going really severely wrong in my life, or in my opinion, wrong in my life, I regained control by starving myself. And it was, I think, in 2012 when I moved away from home for the first time, like far away from home. I moved to the other side of the country for the first time, and I was like away from all of my coping mechanisms. I didn't have my friends there. Like, all the things that I used to do to make me feel better just didn't exist anymore. And I stopped eating again. And that time I took it to the point where I started losing my hair, and I stopped getting my period. And I mean, my parents were concerned, and other people were concerned, and I knew exactly what I was doing. It was that's what I wanted to do. I was feeling like shit mentally, so I wanted to feel like shit physically, and so I don't know if
it's a really weird thing, but it's like you don't want to torture yourself, but you do. And so it's like really an eating disorder is just a slow way of killing yourself. It's kind of like people that cut themselves in a way. I've had family members who have other psychiatric problems that would like cut themselves, but it wasn't enough to like do terminal damage or cut an artery, but it's enough to like mentally, it's weird. It's like signing a death wish very slowly, because you're really in this quasi state of like unsureness with yourself. So yeah, no, I totally relate to that. And what I think is funny is you mentioned moving away and then struggling. So I moved to LA in 2016, and when I was kind of in a slightly better state of mind. I just graduated college, and I thought I was good, and I moved to LA out of all my comfort zone. I lost, it basically was starting over. It was like you didn't have any of your coping mechanisms anymore. And then I got really stressed out there, and I started looking back, I started not only doing restricting stuff, but I started over exercising again. And so that's kind of which led up to my situation now, was like basically me living in LA and being not only mentally stressed all the time from feeling lonely and depressed, but also physically just hurting my body, being in this catabolic state 24/7, whether I was crashing at like, if you were to go to my YouTube channel and look at videos from like summer 2019, I have like, my face is like more sunken in than this. And like, I literally have people still comment on old videos and like, dude, you need to eat. And I'm like, yeah, no shit. Yeah, that's kind of where I was at there. And it's only in retrospect that I realized that I wasn't ready to do that. I wasn't in the right mental space to have taken that leap. And so that's,
Yeah.
just thought I'd relate to you on that.
For me, it was like an intentional form of self-harm, really.
Yeah.
And then, you get really in the habit of doing that, and then it becomes difficult to come back out. I never, I didn't get stuck in it to the point where it became an addiction. I've always been able to pull myself out. My last time that I fell back into this type of behavior was in 2016 when I had a really abusive boyfriend, who actually ended up putting me in the hospital. But it was, I had a really, really rough time being in a new country, in a new place, all these things. And then I ended up dating this asshole. And that was the last time I fell into that. But it was like, it's like a 4-year pattern, really, throughout my life.
Interesting.
And I just started 2 years ago. I finally started working on the mental patterns behind that because I was just so fed up with it. In 2012, I switched to paleo to get out of it, and that kind of helped me for a long time. And I still somewhat do paleo-ish type of diets every now and then. I'm not really paleo anymore. I'm back to eating grains and stuff like that. But that was something that I kind of was able to pull myself out of it. Do you feel like you kind of reached that point that you really pulled yourself out more, or was it that you were ready to accept the help at some point?
So for me, honestly, if I'm going to be real, I thought I was totally better. I have like a video on my YouTube channel where I was like, basically my friend Eric, my business partner, interviewing me about my anorexia journey. And like, if you look at that video, it was right before I got sick. So right now we'll kind of jump to 2019, where I started experiencing, I was sitting in my basement, just watching some anime like a good old kiddo. And my right hand started tingling in the palm. And I thought it was carpal tunnel because I work on a computer all day, and it was like, oh, okay, makes sense. Could be that. And then within a month, it had spread to my whole body, and I was tingling my whole body. My face tingles, my ass tingles, some other areas that I won't talk about tingle sometimes. And that was like the major, so that freaked me out. And that's when I was like, shoot, maybe it has to do a little bit with my eating disorder tendencies and putting all this stress on my body for the last couple of years. So that was my trigger to like get help, was it had to get that bad to get something, would I basically trigger autoimmune reactions in my body. And so that started like a whole nother journey of recovery for me mentally. So I think that really was my trigger, because I look at that video that I recorded right before this happened, and I'm just like, that kid in that video is a straight liar. I'm lying to everyone. I should probably delete the video, but I haven't. But I'm just lying to myself in that whole video about like what I did to recover, how I recovered I wasn't better at all. I was just in a state of being okay with it. And I just accepted that that's where I was always being. But so that's what triggered me wanting to actually get help, was having to get sick with other stuff. And I think it's interesting you mentioned paleo, because I think actually diet, which it's really touchy to talk about diet when you have an eating disorder, because in standard recovery, you're like supposed to eat everything kind of to get over of fear foods. And I don't even think I really have fear foods now, but because I have these other like autoimmune processes going on, it's made me had to really think about what I'm eating and how that's impacting my body, because just loading up on sugar just because I'm afraid of it, which I'm not, but it hurts me. Like I physically feel pain from eating sugary foods.
Really, like processed sugary foods?
Yeah.
Or any type?
Mostly processed foods. Like if I eat cake or something, like I feel it later and it doesn't feel good. So you actually mentioned paleo to me when I first was dealing with these issues, and I kind of had been exploring that a bit. And it actually has helped my mental state, because I feel like your hormone regulation, which you control a lot with your diet, especially eating fat and stuff like that, really adjusts the way your brain processes things. And I have way less anxiety attacks and depressive states than I've had ever before doing any sort of dietary change. So right now it's like balancing that with eating disorder recovery and making sure that I'm not eating this way because of fear of the foods that I'm not eating, but because I think that it's actually improving my overall health, which I think is important.
Yes.
So it's a double-edged sword.
That's why I chose paleo back in the day, because I decided, I need to get my period back, I need to get my hair back, and I need to find something that I'm okay with coming back to normal eating. And for me, paleo was the solution, because it was supposed to help with all these autoimmune disorders and all these other like hormonal things that you were talking about. So for me, it was like a safe re-entry to do by myself, and I have progressed from there over the years to where now I'm almost back to normal diet, because I do have some autoimmune stuff that I need to take care of, but I'm back to a point where I can tolerate any food in moderation.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I mean, it's been a 10-year journey for sure.
Well, yeah.
That is mental, like you said.
Yeah, no, 100%.
And using paleo for me as like a medicine to go back to normal was the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, they're even finding now, I've been reading a lot of like peer-reviewed research on like some of the gut microbiome stuff. All of your neurotransmitters, not all of them, a lot of your neurotransmitters are like manifested in your gut bacteria, and that's where it all starts. So if your gut is has dysbiotic problems and it's not in balance, or you have like SIBO or some sort of intestinal bacterial overgrowth, these various things, that's going to really mess up your mental health. And I know certain doctors that are considering a lot of mental disorders to just be autoimmune in nature from basically gut dysbiosis. And so I think in some cases, and with the eating disorder patients, you need to really work with a team of therapists, doctor, nutritionists to like be on your team with this. But I think there is a level of I think doing some sort of elimination style diet can be helpful depending on where you're at in your recovery. Right. Like if you're really low weight, like that's obviously not going to help, because you need to restore a lot of weight. Yeah. Which is kind of like a little where I'm at right now, where I'm just like, okay, I got to eat to get some stuff up. But I think there is application for it, especially if you have another autoimmune disease with it, because that'll help you get to a point where hopefully you can, where you're at, reintroduce foods that you couldn't tolerate before.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for me, it was the reintroducing healthy foods helped my body just to like come back to normal. And then it was, I think it was 3 years ago when I started working at the gym here, but just kind of happened by accident. One of the instructors left and was like, hey, do you want to take over my class? I'm like, sure, let me get certified. That's how I got into it. And that's when I made like the choice for myself, like, okay, if you're teaching other people how to be healthy, you have to be healthy yourself, so you have to get this under control. So that's when I really started working on the mental aspect of it for myself.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really what it is, working on what's wrong in your brain that's making you hurt yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it too is just like, it's a lot of reflection. You got to find out what is at the root, whether it's like trauma from being like a childhood experience. And a lot of that was for me was like just underlying trauma and insecurity that I had to recognize as the first step. You recognize you have a problem. And then the next step is willing to be open about basically talking about it with somebody, usually a professional therapist, and then taking their recommendations and be willing to implement them into your own life. And that's just an ongoing process that I think if you're dealing with this, that you'll just have to do. I believe you can fully recover from an eating disorder, but I feel like you do need to implement these practices, probably some of them for a lifetime, just to keep yourself from being compulsive in some other area of your life. Because I know a lot of people that they may recover from the eating disorder aspect of it, but then they just manifest a compulsion in something else, whether they become a workaholic or alcohol or anything. So I think there's certain practices that you need to just stay grounded, whether that's religious practice or meditation. I think those things are really important.
Yeah,
to
it's kind of
implementing.
like an addiction, right? You can't replace
Yeah,
this with another addiction. It's something you have to work on your entire life. And then
100%.
when something goes wrong, it's super easy to fall back into this addiction. So I think,
Yeah,
once an eating disorder, always an eating disorder, it kind of stays with you for the rest of your
yeah,
life. But on the other hand, if you once mastered it, or
hmm,
recovered from it, then you already have the tools that you need, and you just have to like kind of stick with the routine.
exactly, exactly.
So for your recovery journey, you said it started with a tingling for you when you said, "Okay, I really need to like do something." From that moment on, like what was your progression from there? Did you stop exercising? Did you?
No, so that was the hardest thing for me to ever like back off on was exercising. My GP wanted me to basically take a break for like a month, and I didn't. And I think the one problem was I probably could have kept I backed off on the weights because I knew weights were what got me into some of the problem where I had just I was putting all this extra tension on my joints. I was like doing dumbbell presses with 50s, and like I was always doing supersets. So every exercise was a superset. And I'm one of those people that when I did back day, I did every back exercise you did at the gym. So I was there for 2 hours. But the
Wow.
thing was, I wasn't doing it in the stereotypical powerlifting fashion where you would rest like a minute or 3 minutes between sets because you're going heavy. I was doing 30 seconds max of rest because I was like, I want my heart rate to be above 100, and I would track that. So I was basically trying to do cardio with weights
Oh God.
and with heavy weights.
All the
So I
while
would
your body
do,
is breaking down.
yeah. So I'm over here doing like deadlifts, and then going immediately and trying to do pull-ups right after that. And then I'm going back and I'm doing dead rows, which is like an explosive movement, and then doing different type of pull-ups.
Wow.
And so I was doing that, imagine 6 days a week, and then walking 12,000 steps a day on all of those days too. And then on my rest day, I still went to the gym, still probably walked 12,000 steps, but I was doing like the forearm workouts with weights where you're like twisting the weight and doing forearm stuff. So I really was never taking a break.
So you should have
So,
been eating like 3,000 calories a day minimum for what
well,
you've been doing.
I was. And so I was actually, before this happened, the nerve stuff, I was training for a Spartan race
Oh.
because I needed a goal. I figured the only way I'm going to gain weight is if I give myself an end date goal to gain weight by. So I was like, if I said, there's no way I could do a Spartan race at 120 pounds and like nothing. So I was like, this will force me to do it because I've signed up for this, right? So I was working with a trainer on my nutrition who was like specifically being a hard A on me about eating. And I was eating like 3,000 calories a day, but I was moving so much that I actually was losing weight still.
Wow.
So I actually regressed to about 122 pounds from like the 130 max that I ever was. And so I was like 122 pounds when the nerve stuff started. And so after that, I realized that exercise was a problem, but I didn't want to give that up. And so I backed off, but I still kept doing it. And even up until about 2 months ago, I was still doing calisthenics, and it was much more controlled. It was like 4 days a week. I was doing rest days. But the problem was I still wasn't gaining weight. I was still 122 pounds. I've maintained that for a year. And I probably wouldn't have had other physical problems if I had just actually eaten and gained weight while I was still working out. It probably would have actually helped the other issues I had. But instead, I continued to break myself down. So I got to a point where like my hands and arms are bad enough with the carpal tunnel stuff that I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't even do my normal job now. Like it hurts enough. So the last month or so, I basically backed off to doing only what my physical therapist wants me to do. And then I just eat like a king every day to try and break that mental block of eating. So, because I know you've been doing a lot of work with, or not a lot of work, but you've been doing work with people that are dealing with their own chronic conditions like MS. And we were going to discuss kind of the importance of movement with any of those disorders.
Yeah, so I'm actually training cancer survivors, people with Crohn's, People with MS, people with arthritis. I have people with stuff like frozen shoulder surgeries, knee replacements. So, like a lot of common and not so crazy common things. But with all of them, we do a lot of, restorative exercises, a lot of mobility exercises, like a lot of like more physical therapy type of exercises together with strength exercises. And we talk about nutrition quite a bit too. And it kind of became a passion of mine to try to help broken people to get better.
And that's kind of where I'm at on my journey when I met with my new neurologist and his team of like neurofitness people, because they deal with a lot of people with MS. And so they have a specific neurofitness program that they do with them. Some of them actually train with electronic stimulation to help stimulate muscle growth. A lot of athletes will use that when they're coming back from injury. They'll do electronic stimulation with PT exercises to basically speed up healing. But so I've been basically focusing on purely restorative exercises, a lot of scapular strengthening for posture, because I'm realizing that these are all muscle groups that I never fixed when I lost all the weight the first time. And when you become anorexic physically and you're under 100 pounds, you don't have any muscle strength at all. I remember jumping off a ledge that was like 1 foot depth, and I collapsed completely because my body couldn't handle the weight of that jump. And that freaked me out too. So I think restorative exercise is really important to build up the little muscles that support the larger muscles, because otherwise you develop what I probably had, all of these imbalances that are only compounding other problems.
Most people have those imbalances. Like even healthy people have a lot of imbalances just because of our sedative lifestyles, all the sitting, all the like looking down at the phone. People are short in the front, overstretched in the back. They don't have any type of strength to like hold their head up and pull their shoulders back. They don't have any of the stabilizing muscles. Like the amount of people that can't really get out of a car without having to hold on to something is insane. Or the people that I see, especially here in America, where people are a little bit on the heavier side a lot, just where walking is difficult, or very simple things like reaching for stuff, they just don't have the core strength to support themselves when they reach for something. It's a little scary to see that,
Yeah.
And it's something that's totally preventable.
This is something that we talk about. We'll have you on our podcast later on, and we'll talk about this too. Because 88% of the American population has some metabolic disease, basically. So hypertension, diabetes, high blood pressure, one of those, 88% of people have it. And when I heard that statistic, I was blown away. Crazy. But it's so true when I travel outside of Utah, especially because Utah is a little bit of a health bubble with the LDS population. They're really focused on like being perfect. But when I travel, like I was recently in the Midwest to see my doctor, and I was like, God, dude, everyone is like way overweight. But the problem is like we have this small subset of the population that is equally unhealthy, but they're underweight. Or they're not even underweight, but they have metabolic disease just from the diets that we consume in Western culture. Because you can have disease and not be fat. Like it's really interesting.
Syrup needs to be illegal. It just needs to not exist. Like that's
100%.
All those dyes, red 60,
red dye third, all of those are terrible.
They need to go.
The other thing that's really bad is seed oils. So like canola oil, grapeseed oil, all of those have high ties with basically metabolic disease. And it's so funny looking at the every 5 years they do dietary recommendations in the US for the whole nation. And it's like every year it's the same thing. And it's like, it's ridiculous. So,
and the science exists, the studies exist. We do know how to do it better. At this point, like when I first started with paleo, it was really hard to like find healthy foods and find a lot of information on it and find, valid information on stuff like gut bacteria and what should your poop actually look like and what should it actually feel like to go to the bathroom and stuff like that wasn't like really readily available. I think the first one that I found online was Diane Sanfilippo. She did one of the first paleo cookbooks, and that to this day is like my Bible. And I I give it to my clients all the time.
You literally sent me that book. I think that was the first book I looked at, was that one. And then I kind of transitioned into one name I'll throw out there for anyone. And by now, this lady should pay me to do it because I've worked with her and I've talked about her so much. Her name is Dr. Terry Walls. And she had...
I have the book now. I ordered it.
Oh, yeah.
It just got here.
So she's a doctor that in the year 2000 was diagnosed with MS. And by 2007, she had secondary progressive, which means you're only going downhill. There's no relapsing. There's no remission. It's just straight downhill. She was in a wheelchair. She was actually in a recliner wheelchair because she didn't have the core strength to sit up anymore. Wow. And she basically, as a doctor, went back to the basic science, went back to paleo principles, and designed a diet specifically for feeding your mitochondria. Because what she discovered is that in almost every disease, the problem is the same. It's always your mitochondria just don't work. So her idea was if you can feed...
to the listeners what that is real quick.
So yeah, your mitochondria are basically the cells in your body that produce energy called ATP. And so when those begin to malfunction, whether through bad diet or lack of movement or all of these things above, your body doesn't produce energy as well as it should. And that's why, you see people like my dad who get home and it's like 5 o'clock and they're fatigued. It's why you see people go through these swings of up and down all day long, the 3 o'clock window where there's like the 3 o'clock low where you're tired. You're not supposed to feel that as like a human. That's not like a normal thing. It's been normalized, but also the majority of people are sick. So when you live in a sick society, what's normal isn't necessarily optimal. And so she went back to the basic science, was like, what nutrients do these mitochondria energy cells need to function optimally? And she basically designed a diet around that for her MS, but she's now seeing it applicable to basically most chronic illnesses and autoimmune diseases. And I would argue 90% of disease is avoidable and probably to an extent reversible, even diabetes, through diet and lifestyle alteration. And the problem is we live in a society where being sick is perpetuated and the pharmaceutical industry wants to sell you a drug to hide the symptoms of the disease, but not treat the root cause of the problem. So
it's not just that, it's also people just not wanting to give up convenience or the joy of eating. That is something I've heard quite a bit from clients that I talked about.
That's 100%.
They just, they say stuff like, my body hurts so much and I'm so tired all the time that this food gives me so much joy, I just cannot give it up. And I always, try to gently argue in the direction, push them in the direction of, but maybe if you just reduce it a little bit and over time you would feel a little better and you wouldn't need it as much.
Yeah, my argument always with that, because that's very true. That's probably the biggest struggle with most people. Now, it was easy for me to like give up dairy and stuff because I already had an eating disorder. So restriction is like easy for me. So that's why I said my story is a little different with that, where I've had to find a balance. But for people that don't have that problem, I always try to tell them that don't look at this as restricting your life. Think of it as an opportunity to be better than you were or are. Because for me, it was easy because it's like, I feel like crap. So giving up something to not feel like crap, that's a win for me. And if it's as easy as just eating a different food, then that's like a way better option. And the one thing I will say is, while certain parts of my condition aren't better, that's probably because of my anorexia tendencies that I never worked on. My energy is way better than it was before. I used to fall asleep at like 4 p.m. every day. I'd go to bed by 8 every night, which is not normal for like a 20-year-old. So I don't have any of those problems anymore. And that's totally by changing my diet and having my energy cells work better. So, but that is hard. And that's why I think the best way to get into any of that is make really slow transitions. Yes. So like for some people, the first one is like, just cut back on soda or even so the key principles really are like removing gluten, removing dairy, if you have an autoimmune disease, sometimes removing eggs, because sometimes egg whites can be problematic. So if you want to be a little rigorous, it's like start with one of those, like remove gluten. There are a lot of gluten alternatives, but the best way to go about any of it is to just go back to eating whole foods, because that's what your body is naturally made to use. And I think of it as like, what did your ancestors eat? Our ancestors didn't have access to cake and pies and like candy bars, or even like a lot of just processed other foods. They didn't have access to that. So I try to look at it from that perspective. And I think it's just always about slowly transitioning into it. And you could probably tell me like what's been some of your experience or successes with some of your clients in that area.
So I have one client, she has Crohn's, and she is off any type of medication. She doesn't need any medication anymore. She can just manage herself with just stress management and with her diet.
Awesome.
And then I have another client, she is pretty young and she has Crohn's and she's on heavy medication and she doesn't do those things, you know? So that's a pretty, I mean, you can't really compare people like that, but kinda you can. And I want to say that neither of us is a nutritionist, neither of us is a doctor. This is just, you know, from our own research. This is just from our own experience. For me,
100%.
For me personally, I had mono really, really bad when I was 25. Like really bad, and it triggered my autoimmune disorder, which is a histamine intolerance, or it kind of turns into histaminosis. And for me, it was urticaria, so it was like a rash. I could see right here where I scratched myself, you know, so it gets triggered through friction and it'll like cause a rash like that and it'll itch more and then I scratch more and it'll just get worse. And at that point, it was so bad that I could take a pen and not even like open, so like this, and I could write on my body and it would just pop up in big itchy red bubbles. It was so bad that I could not go to work because I could literally not get dressed. Just the friction from clothes on my body was I couldn't do it. I wanted to, it was really hard not to do it, but I wanted to rip my hair out. I was just so itchy and uncomfortable. And what I did was an elimination diet. And I'm really lucky because my mom's a doctor and she was kind of like, oh, this could be this. And I found this website that could help you. So let's try that. And what I did was an elimination diet for 1 week. I ate only white rice and only boiled potatoes, no skin. Absolutely no spices, no seasoning, no nothing. I started adding back salt after a week. Then I started adding back sugar. And then I went, you know, I think the first thing that I did was slow cooked turkey or something like that. No seasonings, no skin on it. And then boiled apples, boiled carrots, you know, one after the other. I added it back in. And whenever I added something that triggered a reaction, I would just take it back out. And it took me from getting sick to fully recovering to eating absolutely everything again. It took me 3 to 4 years.
I think that's pretty standard. I mean, that's the hardest thing with working with anybody or just yourself is like, I'm super impatient. So like I wanted like results yesterday.
Yep.
So especially with the elimination diet stuff, I know people that have there's someone named Michaela Peterson, who you might know.
It rings a bell, but I'm not sure.
Do you know who Jordan Peterson is? Okay. So he's a political figure in Canada, but his daughter has like a really bad rheumatoid arthritis. And she actually had like a hip and ankle replacement by 17, which is insane. And she figured out that it was her diet that was really triggering her autoimmune disease. But the only way she could not trigger it was to eat meat. And she literally ate just meat for like the last 3 years.
Wow.
And not suggesting this to anyone, by the way, don't do this. But it's really fascinating how food can trigger these things. And she's just now, after 3 years, been able to like reintroduce like spices on her meat.
Wow, yeah.
So it's like, it's a slow process and it's a different time for everybody. Most people will not be that extreme, but it is fascinating.
I have another client who coincidentally has this absolutely same thing that I have, but just a tad stronger, which is crazy because it's like it doesn't really happen that often. It's not a very common thing, but she cannot eat any nightshades. So with the histaminosis, like either your body doesn't break down histamine or you produce a lot of histamine. And histamine is the stuff in your body that makes you react allergic. So basically you're allergic to yourself. And histamine is also in food. It's like in ripe bananas, it's in wine, it's in any type of nightshade. So like peppers, tomatoes, eggplants, all of those trigger histamine. And she cannot eat those things. She can eat a fairly normal diet, but she has to eat whole foods and she has to cut out quite a lot of stuff still, which I don't. Yeah, I'm super lucky that way. But she can still manage everything just through food and live a normal life. And she's been building muscle, and you know, it's great to see her progress and just get stronger as she's working on it. And she said she's had this all her life, but she only recently found out how to work with it. And just seeing somebody go through that transformation is kind of amazing. You know, it's food can make such a big difference that it's almost scary.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've actually recently kind of been toying with wondering whether or not I have something called mast cell activation, which is basically histamine intolerance. It's basically it's like you mentioned and I know for a fact that my body, so there's a gene called DAO, which is supposed to regulate the breakdown of histamines in your blood. Some people have a dirty DAO gene, so it doesn't break them down efficiently, so you're more likely to accumulate histamine in your blood, and I have that. So I don't get any of the extreme like anaphylactic like hives. I don't get hives, but I do notice like when I eat like avocado or other higher histamine foods like sauerkraut, I do get like itchy.
Oh yeah, fermented food is bad.
Yeah. But what's funny is mine doesn't happen for like a few hours. So it took me forever to like pull it back to relating it to that, because it happens a couple hours later.
Right, that's
because you're digesting.
Tricky. And it kind of depends on what the problem in your body is. You know, if you can't break it down or if you're just producing too much of it, there are different ways. I never get tested. Like I never had the gene test done, so I don't even know what the problem in my body is. I just know that too much histamine is not good for me. I mean, I just can't break it down because for me it's mostly through food.
Yeah, and I mean, at that point, it's like once you figure it out, there's no point even really trying to find out why if you know how to control it. But it's really fascinating, and I think
it's a bug.
Yeah, it's Mike Pence's fly. He's still around.
That was so funny.
that was
that fly.
that was probably the greatest meme of 2020. That almost saved the year for me.
Yeah, so true.
But I just think there's a lot of things you can do when you have. My thing is like I don't care what illness you have, whether it's like genetic or it's an autoimmune, which some people say is genetic. Autoimmune, neurodegenerative like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. There are things that clinically they're beginning to show through diet and lifestyle that will impact those things. And if they don't impact those directly, they're going to impact everything else. So I just don't see a loss in tackling it, because it's like, sure, you may have one thing, but if you don't develop diabetes later, well, then that's just something that you won't have to deal with on top of what you already deal with.
Right.
So I think everything you've mentioned with like movement and diet is really important for anybody struggling with anything, even just general population.
I mean, I can totally like see it on myself with the mood too. The more like processed carbs I eat, the more moody I get, the more mood swings I have, which is probably just my blood sugar. I'm assuming like the spikes and the dips, you know, and I'm a lot more frustrated when I have more carbs in my diet, and that's something that I noticed like after a few weeks. Like over the holidays, I've like definitely been eating a lot of stuff that I usually shouldn't be eating, so I'm a lot itchier than I usually am, which aggravates me, of course. And then, you know, I had a lot of mood swings the entire time, so I started slowly cutting that back out again and coming back to normal, and my moods are slowly coming back to normal too. So it really affects everything. And same with exercise, you know, exercising triggers endorphins in your body.
Yeah.
So it's just those things are so important for a balance. And if you think about it, the way we live now it's not how an animal, which we are, should be living. We shouldn't be indoors all the time. We shouldn't be sitting all the time. We shouldn't be looking at screens. We should be outdoors and being social and moving.
I think kind of rounding out this podcast, one thing to talk about would be the importance of getting outside, because that's one thing that my basically my neurofitness person has been telling me to do, is spend 15 to 30 minutes a day outside. So I'll go to a nature center that's near my house and like walk around the nature center. And I think that that's something that every human needs, because like you just said, we're all animals. So at a base level, we're like supposed to be. That's part of the problem with some of the pandemic stuff, is like we haven't been able to do that. And like rightfully so, but like it really has affected, I've noticed it, me over the last year, being stuck inside a large amount of time. So I think being able to get out, and I think the proper term is called like forest bathing, where you like go out into the forest or the woods or whatever, and just spend time out there. But even if it's just like sitting out on your lawn for a little bit and getting some sun, I think that's good, depending.
I think that was a trend a couple years ago, tree bathing, where people would just like go and sit under trees.
Yeah.
It's good. You should do that. You should touch plants and stuff like that. There are bacteria in soil that make you feel happier. Like there are studies about that, so that should be done. But let's round this podcast up, like you said. And my last question to you would be, with all your history that we talked about, what would be your, let's say, top three tips you would give to somebody who maybe struggles with eating or struggles with some mental problems that lead to that? What would you tell them to do?
Well, I think the first one is just recognizing that you have a problem and being honest and real with yourself, because that was the first step to taking any action, is to recognize that you need to continually work on yourself. And as people, as just a conscious being, we're always working to be a better person. And that's a process that's never ending. If you think that you've achieved everything and you don't have anything to learn about yourself, I think that's a misleading thought, because we always can be working on some aspect of our mental health. So the first step is being willing to, first recognizing that you might have a problem with food or whatever. And then secondly, being willing to accept, being open to other people's advice, whether that's from a health professional, a nutritionist, a therapist, a physical trainer, being open to trying new things. Because if you're closed-minded and you're not willing to broaden your scope, it doesn't matter if you recognize you have a problem. Repeating the same things over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. So that would probably be the second tip. And then the third one is to give yourself some grace along the journey, because you're not going to discover health or a perfect mental state of being overnight, and you're going to make mistakes. It's not going to be a linear line to your destination. And I can tell you that because I thought it would be, and it has yet to give me a straight direction. It's a lot more like a meandering river, and it's very annoying and pestering. And sometimes you want to give up, and I guarantee you there will be bad days and good days. But it's not about getting to the destination. It's about the journey along the way. So I think as long as you're up for the up and down challenge, and you're willing to forgive yourself for past mistakes and try new things going forward, and willing to accept that you will yet again make mistakes, I think you will get to where you want to go.
I think that was very well said. Thank you so much. Tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Ryan Mitchell Brown. I'm sure they'll be in the description. You can find my YouTube channel. It's Culture Clash. Totally different than anything we just talked about. I do have a health podcast that you'll see your friend right here on very soon, called Road to Recovery Podcast, where we talk about pretty much, we have eating disorder experts on, as well as doctors that are in the health industry, our health and wellness space and talking about fitness, autoimmune disease, cover it all. So you can find us there, but those are probably the best places to reach out to me. And I'm willing to talk to anybody about this. I'm an open book.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. It was really great having you. And of course, I'm going to link everything down in the description below. So make sure you check that out. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. And now go get your beast mode on and get strong.